From the moment you wake to the moment you sleep, almost every decision, shift of focus, reflex, and habit you carry out is a byproduct of hidden psychological forces working beneath conscious awareness. You believe you're a conscious, independent agent making deliberate choices. But neuroscience reveals something far more unsettling. Approximately 99% of your day is not dictated by conscious decisions, but by subtle, powerful psychological mechanisms perfected by millions of years of evolution to keep you alive, engaged, and, mostly, sane in a world that would otherwise overwhelm your limited cognitive bandwidth. This isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. Your brain's limited processing capacity and powerful biases allow you to filter incomprehensible complexity, conserve precious energy, and react with lightning-fast efficiency. Without these mechanisms, you'd be paralyzed by decision-making. But these psychological tricks can also be hijacked, exploited by others, or simply leave you stuck repeating the same dysfunctional patterns year after year without understanding why. The 25 psychological tricks detailed in this exploration are the hidden machinery that runs your days, shapes your decisions, and molds your reality. Some are helpful, some are harmful. Most are neutral until activated or exploited. But all of them are operating right now, in this moment, shaping what you do next. Understanding these tricks doesn't mean you'll suddenly gain conscious control over your life. That's unrealistic. But it does mean you'll see the machinery. And seeing the machinery is the first step toward working with it intentionally instead of being completely unconsciously controlled by it. 1. The habit. Loop trick. Cue, routine, reward, repeat. A habit is a neural circuit consisting of 3 components: cue, routine, and reward. The cue is an environmental trigger or internal state that signals your brain that a particular routine should begin. The routine is the behavior itself, a series of actions executed with little conscious input. The reward is the positive outcome or sensation that follows the routine, which reinforces the neural circuit so it becomes more automatic the next time. Here's the neuroscience. When you repeat a behavior sequence many times, your brain gradually shifts the primary neural activity from your prefrontal cortex, conscious deliberative, to your basal ganglia, automatic, habitual. This shift takes weeks or months depending on the behavior's complexity and frequency. But once it happens, the behavior becomes nearly automatic. You can execute the entire sequence with minimal conscious attention. Consider your morning routine. You wake up. Within minutes, you've automatically brushed your teeth, showered, gotten dressed, eaten something, and checked your phone. You might not consciously remember making any of these decisions. Your brain simply executed the habitual sequence because each cue triggered the next routine. More than 40 of your daily actions are estimated to be habitual. This includes how you brush your teeth, organize your workspace, eat meals, exercise or avoid exercise, drive routes you take regularly, interact with familiar people, and consume media. Habits are extraordinarily efficient. They let you reserve your precious cognitive resources for novel problems and complex decision-making. But habits are also the mechanism through which people get stuck. A habit that was useful at one point in your life, smoking to manage stress, binge eating to manage emotions, compulsively checking email to manage anxiety, persists long after its usefulness has ended. The neural circuit has become so automatic that conscious intention alone can't override it. Why are bad habits so difficult to break? Because you're not fighting the habit itself. You're fighting a deeply entrenched neural circuit that has been reinforced thousands of times. Willpower might work for a few days or weeks, but eventually, the habitual circuit reasserts itself. The habit loop is context dependent. This is crucial for habit change. The cue that triggers the habit is environmental. If you change your environment, you change which cues are available to trigger the habit. This is why people who move to a new city often find that their smoking habit decreases. The environmental cues that triggered the smoking routine are absent in the new location. Marketing companies and app designers understand the habit loop intimately. They deliberately engineer products to exploit this mechanism. Why is your phone's notification system so compelling? Because it creates a cue routine reward loop. The notification, cue, triggers you to check your phone, routine. You receive validation through likes or messages or novel content, reward. The loop repeats, strengthening the neural circuit until phone checking becomes deeply habitual. Social media platforms are explicitly designed around the habit loop. Instagram's infinite scroll creates a cue, novelty, that triggers the routine. Keep scrolling. The reward is the unpredictable arrival of engaging content. This variable reward schedule creates habit loops that are more powerful than consistent rewards. You keep scrolling because you never know when the next engaging content will appear, just like a slot machine. Understanding the habit loop means understanding that you're not weak or undisciplined if you can't overcome a bad habit through willpower. You're fighting millions of years of evolutionary design, plus deliberate product engineering designed by teams of psychologists and neuroscientists. The better approach is not to fight the habit through willpower, but to change the context and environment so that different cues are triggered, different routines are executed, and different rewards are received. The habit loop trick is so fundamental to human behavior that it appears in virtually every aspect of your daily life. Recognizing it is the first step toward working with it intentionally. 2. The momentum bias trick. Why starting is harder than continuing. Once something is in motion, it tends to stay in motion. This is a principle of physics, but it's also a principle of psychology. Momentum bias is the tendency to continue activities once they've begun, and to experience difficulty starting new activities. Starting something requires overcoming inertia. The startup energy needed to begin a task is often greater than the energy needed to continue the task once it's started. Your brain has to overcome the activation energy barrier. But once you're engaged in the activity, momentum carries you forward with far less effort. This is why people often say, "I just need to get started," about tasks they find difficult. They understand intuitively that starting is the hard part. Once they start, momentum will likely carry them through. Consider exercise. The thought of going to the gym might feel overwhelming. The activation energy needed to overcome inertia, getting dressed in workout clothes, driving to the gym, starting the workout is substantial. But once you've started exercising, you often find that continuing is much easier. Momentum carries you through the workout more easily than the initial decision to go to the gym. This applies to creative work. Writers often say the hardest part is sitting down and starting to write. But once they're writing, momentum carries them forward. The words flow more easily once they've overcome the initial inertia. Momentum bias has profound implications for procrastination and productivity. Procrastination often isn't about motivation in the moment, it's about the difficulty of overcoming inertia. The task seems overwhelming because you're focused on the startup energy rather than the fact that continuing is easier than starting. Understanding momentum bias reveals why breaking tasks into smaller starting points is effective. Instead of write a whole chapter, break it into write the first paragraph. The smaller starting point requires less activation energy. Once you've started with the paragraph, momentum often carries you into writing more. Momentum bias also explains why multitasking is so cognitively expensive. Every time you switch tasks, you have to overcome the momentum inertia of the previous task and build new momentum on the new task. Continuous task switching means you're constantly paying the startup energy cost without building sufficient momentum on any single task. Your daily behavior is controlled partly by momentum bias. If you can get started on something, Momentum will likely carry you further than you expect. If you stay in a state of inertia, nothing gets accomplished. 3. The default bias trick. The tyranny of the status quo. Your brain has an enormous preference for the status quo. Given choices, your brain defaults to the current state. The default is whatever is already happening, whatever is already set up, whatever requires no action to maintain. This is called default bias, and it controls where you live, what you earn, what you eat, what you believe, and how you spend your time. Research shows that people are far more likely to stick with a retirement plan's default investment option than to actively select a different option, even when the default option isn't optimal for their situation. The default is chosen not because it's the best option, but because it requires no action. Countries that make organ donation the default, where you opt out rather than opt in, have dramatically higher donation rates than countries where donation requires active opt-in. The default controls behavior at the population level. Default bias is so powerful that it's used strategically in policy design. By changing the default, you can change behavior without forcing anyone to do anything differently. You're simply changing what requires no action. Your daily behavior is controlled largely by defaults. Your default morning routine, your default breakfast, your default commute route, your default work schedule, your default evening routine. You execute these defaults automatically without consciously choosing them each day. But default bias creates path dependence. The default path you start on becomes increasingly difficult to leave. Early career choices set a default path that accumulates with each passing year. The longer you stay on the default path, the more costs are associated with leaving it, and the more entrenched the default becomes. A person stays in a career they don't enjoy, partly because they are on the default path. Changing would require significant effort retraining, financial sacrifice, unknown outcomes. The default path, even if unsatisfying, seems safer than the unknown alternative. A person stays in a relationship partly because they are on the default path. The relationship is the status quo. Changing would require significant effort and involve unknown outcomes. The default, even if unfulfilling, seems safer. A person stays in a location partly because they are on the default path. Moving would require effort, financial cost, and adaptation. The default, even if the location doesn't match the person's values or goals, persists. What makes default bias particularly controlling is that it's passive. You don't actively choose the default each day. You simply accept the status quo because changing from the default requires active effort. Most people don't expend that effort. Default bias reveals why intentional life design is difficult. You have to actively override your brain's preference for the status quo. You have to consciously choose different defaults. If you don't actively design your defaults, your brain will select the path of least resistance, which is typically whatever is already happening. 4. The reward prediction. Error trick. How dopamine shapes your future expectations. Your brain doesn't simply respond to rewards. Your brain makes predictions about what rewards will occur based on past experience. When reality matches your prediction, there's minimal emotional response. When reality exceeds your prediction, your brain releases dopamine and learns to increase motivation towards similar situations. When reality falls short of your prediction, your brain experiences negative effect and learns to decrease motivation. This process is called reward prediction error, and it controls much of your motivation, your learning, and your daily behavior. Consider checking your phone. You check your phone expecting a message or notification. If there's no message, you experience mild disappointment. You check again, hoping the prediction was wrong, and there's now a message. This creates compulsive checking behavior driven by the small possibility that your prediction will be exceeded. You're not consciously thinking, I'm responding to reward prediction error. You're simply experiencing a pull to check your phone again. The pull is generated by your dopamine system's response to the possibility that this time there might be a message. This mechanism is exploited systematically through variable reward schedules. Slot machines don't provide predictable rewards. They provide unpredictable rewards on variable schedules. A prediction error system that expects rare wins but receives them variably creates powerful dopamine responses. People become addicted to slot machines not because the rewards are large, but because the prediction errors are powerful. Social media exploits this mechanism. You post something and check to see how many likes or comments it has received. The engagement is unpredictable and variable. Your prediction system doesn't know whether the next check will show engagement or not. This creates dopamine responses that motivate continued checking. The variable schedule creates more powerful motivation than a consistent schedule would. What makes reward prediction error particularly controlling is that it operates through emotion and neurochemistry rather than through conscious logic. You might consciously understand that checking your phone repeatedly is unlikely to produce new messages, but your dopamine system continues to generate hope that the next check will produce a message. The emotional pull is more powerful than the conscious logic. This mechanism also explains why novelty is so rewarding. Your brain makes predictions based on past experience. When you encounter something novel, your predictions are violated. The violation generates a dopamine response. Your brain learns that novelty is rewarding. This is why new products, new relationships, new experiences feel so rewarding they violate your predictions. But over time, as you experience the same thing repeatedly, your predictions adjust. The novel becomes familiar. Your predictions are no longer violated. The dopamine response decreases. This is called hedonic adaptation. The excitement of a new car fades as the car becomes familiar. The excitement of a new relationship fades as the relationship becomes familiar. Understanding reward prediction error reveals why maintaining engagement requires novelty or variability. If you want someone to remain engaged in a task, you need to create unpredictable rewards or progressive increases in challenge. If you want someone to become disengaged, provide predictable rewards or keep the task static. 5. The attention allocation trick. What you think about is what your brain lets you think about. Your brain receives vastly more sensory information every moment than your consciousness can process. Your visual system receives millions of bits of information per second. Your auditory system processes thousands of sounds. Your somatosensory system monitors pain, temperature, and touch across your entire body. Yet your consciousness is aware of only a tiny fraction of this information. Your brain must constantly make decisions about what sensory information to pass to consciousness and what information to filter out. This process is called attention allocation, and it controls what you consciously experience. What your brain allocates attention toward determines what you think about, what you worry about, what occupies your mental space. This allocation is influenced by several factors. Novelty captures attention. Unusual things grab your attention more readily than familiar things. This is called the novelty bias. Your brain's threat detection systems have evolved to notice changes in the environment because changes might indicate danger. Emotional significance captures attention. Things related to your values, your fears, or your goals capture attention more readily than neutral things. If you have a goal to be fit, you'll notice fitness-related information more than someone without that goal. If you have a fear of rejection, you'll notice rejecting social cues more readily than someone without that fear. Threat captures attention very powerfully. Your brain has evolved to allocate massive attention toward potential threats. A threat in your environment will capture your attention faster than anything else, even novel information you find interesting. Recent experience captures attention. Things you've recently thought about continue to capture attention. If you recently learned about a disease, you'll start noticing health-related information everywhere. This is called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, or frequency illusion. The information was always there, but your attention wasn't allocated toward it until you had reason to look for it. What makes attention allocation particularly controlling is that it's largely determined by factors outside your conscious control. You don't consciously decide to allocate attention to a threat. Your brain automatically detects the threat and allocates attention toward it. You don't consciously decide to worry about a possible future threat. Your brain automatically detects the possibility and allocates attention toward worry. Your daily actions are controlled partly by where your attention is allocated. If your attention is allocated toward your phone, you act differently than if your attention is allocated toward conversation. If your attention is allocated toward a worry, you act differently than if your attention is allocated toward a task. Marketing and media exploit attention allocation by making their content novel, emotionally charged, or connected to recent experiences or threats. Once your attention is captured, you think about the content. Your consciousness is now occupied with the advertiser's or media outlet's message. Understanding attention allocation reveals why you can't think about multiple things simultaneously. Your brain allocates attention sequentially. You think about one thing, then another, then another. The order in which your attention is allocated determines what occupies your consciousness. It also reveals why focus is so difficult in modern environments. Your environment contains numerous attention-capturing stimuli, notifications, messages, notifications, novel information, potential threats. Your brain's attention allocation systems are constantly being hijacked by these stimuli. Maintaining sustained attention on a single task requires deliberately reducing the number of attention-capturing stimuli in your environment. 6. The time perception trick. Your brain distorts time without your awareness. Your brain doesn't experience time as an objective constant. Your brain experiences time as fluid and malleable, distorted by attention, emotion, and context. When you're engaged in something you enjoy, time seems to pass quickly. An hour of entertainment feels like 20 minutes. When you're in pain or bored, time seems to pass slowly. 20 minutes of waiting feels like an hour. This distortion is called time perception distortion, and it controls how you experience your daily life and how long you're willing to engage in activities. The distortion occurs partly because of attention. When you're absorbed in an engaging activity, your attention is focused on the activity. You're not monitoring time. Time seems to disappear because you're not paying attention to it. Meanwhile, when you're bored or in pain, your attention is partly focused on time itself. You're monitoring how much time has passed. Time seems to move slowly because you're hyper-aware of its passage. Engagement lengthens your time horizon unconsciously. If you're engaged in an activity, you lose track of time and continue far longer than you intended. People lose track of time while scrolling social media, playing video games, or working on absorbing tasks. The time distortion causes them to spend more time on the activity than they consciously intended. Your brain also distorts time in retrospect. An event that felt like it lasted an hour might have actually lasted 20 minutes, and vice versa. The retrospective distortion depends on how densely packed the experience was with novelty, stimulation, and on how much attention was allocated. An experience packed with novel events feels like it lasted longer in retrospect than it actually did. What makes time perception particularly controlling is that it affects your daily actions and your life trajectory. If you underestimate how long you spend on certain activities, you might spend far more time than you realize on those activities. If you overestimate how long something takes, you might avoid engaging in it. Your daily behavior is controlled partly by your distorted perception of time. An activity that would actually take 20 minutes might feel like it will take an hour, causing you to avoid it. An activity that would actually take 3 hours might feel like it will take 30 minutes, causing you to underestimate the commitment and overcommit yourself. 7. The decision fatigue. Trick how mental depletion controls your choices. Every decision you make depletes a limited cognitive resource. The more decisions you make, the more depleted this resource becomes. As depletion increases, your decision quality decreases. Your choices become more impulsive, more self-defeating, more likely to be regretted later. This process is called decision fatigue, and it controls a substantial portion of your daily decisions, particularly the decisions you make later in the day or after intensive decision-making. After a long day of decision-making, your capacity for deliberation is depleted. You make poorer choices about food, about spending, about commitments. You're more likely to eat unhealthy food late in the day. You're more likely to make impulsive purchases. You're more likely to commit to things you later regret. What makes decision fatigue particularly controlling is that you're often not aware it's happening. You might feel tired or less motivated, but you might not recognize that your decision quality has decreased. You might make poor choices and only later realize how poor they were. Decision fatigue also explains why powerful people often make seemingly irrational choices. A CEO who has spent all day making high-stakes decisions might make a poor personal choice in the evening. The decision quality has declined not because the CEO is irrational, but because the cognitive resources have been depleted. Decision fatigue also explains why people often make the default choice as the day progresses. Making the default choice requires less cognitive resources than considering alternatives. So people stick with the status quo, stick with familiar choices, avoid trying new options not because they want to, but because their cognitive resources are depleted. This mechanism is so well known that it's used strategically. Executives wear the same clothes repeatedly. They eat the same meals repeatedly. They have the same schedule repeatedly. By eliminating trivial decisions, they preserve cognitive capacity for important decisions. Your daily actions are controlled partly by when decisions are made. Decisions made early in the day are typically higher quality than decisions made late in the day. This is why important decisions should be made in the morning and less important decisions should be made after the day's mental depletion has accumulated. 8. The scarcity mindset. Trick how limited resources narrow your thinking. When you perceive that a resource is limited, your brain enters a scarcity mindset. In scarcity mindset, your cognitive resources are allocated toward the scarce resource. Your attention narrows. Your thinking becomes more short-term focused. Your ability to plan long-term and see options beyond the immediate problem decreases. This is called scarcity mindset, and it controls much of your thinking when you perceive limited time, limited money, limited options, or limited capacity. When you're short on time, your brain enters scarcity mindset. Your attention narrows toward immediate tasks. Your ability to think long-term decreases. You make different choices when in time scarcity than you would make with abundant time. Someone with abundant time might invest in learning a new skill. Someone in time scarcity focuses on immediate tasks and avoids activities that won't have immediate payoff. When you're short on money, your brain enters scarcity mindset. Your attention narrows toward financial concerns. Your cognitive bandwidth for other tasks decreases. A study showed that financial scarcity reduces cognitive capacity as much as losing a night's sleep. People in financial scarcity have reduced working memory, reduced ability to plan, reduced ability to consider options. What makes scarcity mindset particularly controlling is that it's self-perpetuating. When in scarcity mindset, you make decisions that perpetuate scarcity. You don't invest in solutions that would reduce scarcity because you're too focused on the immediate problem. You don't take actions that would increase resources because you're too preoccupied with current limitations. Someone in time scarcity doesn't invest in systems that would save time because they don't have time to set up systems. Someone in financial scarcity doesn't invest in education that would increase earning because they can't afford education. The scarcity mindset perpetuates the scarcity. Your daily actions are controlled by whether you're operating in scarcity mindset or abundance mindset. In scarcity mindset, you make reactive decisions. In abundance mindset, you make strategic decisions. 9. The social proof trick. How the crowd controls your behavior. Your brain has a powerful default assumption. If many people are doing something, it must be correct or right. This is called social proof, and it controls much of your daily behavior. You wait in line at a restaurant, even though you're not particularly hungry. There's a line, so the restaurant must be good. You buy a product that's labeled as a bestseller, even though you haven't independently evaluated the product. You believe something is true because you've seen many people saying it online. What makes social proof particularly controlling is that you're often not aware it's influencing you. You think you're making independent judgments when you're actually following the crowd's lead. Social proof is exploited systematically in marketing through bestseller labels, through testimonials, through laugh tracks on television, through viewer counts on videos, through like counts on social media. Each of these exploits your brain's tendency to follow the crowd. When you see a video has millions of views, you assume it must be worth watching. When you see a product is a bestseller, you assume it must be good. When you see many people liking a post, you assume it must be valuable. The crowd's behavior becomes evidence about quality and truth. Your daily actions are controlled partly by what you perceive others are doing. If you perceive that many people are buying a product, you're more likely to buy it. If you perceive that many people believe something, you're more likely to believe it. If you perceive that many people are engaging in a behavior, you're more likely to engage in it. 10. The reciprocity trick. How receiving obligates you. When someone does something for you, your brain automatically generates a sense of obligation to reciprocate. This is called reciprocity, and it's a fundamental human tendency that controls much of your daily social behavior. When someone gives you something, even if unsolicited, you feel obligated to give something in return. When someone does a favor for you, you feel obligated to do a favor for them. This sense of obligation is so powerful that it overrides your rational judgment about whether reciprocation is in your interest. What makes reciprocity particularly controlling is that the initial gift or favor doesn't have to be large or valuable. A small gift creates a sense of obligation that's much larger than the gift's value. A telemarketer sends you a small gift with their marketing materials. You feel obligated to at least consider their offer. Reciprocity is exploited systematically through free samples, through free trials, through free consultations, through free information. Each of these creates a sense of obligation that the marketer hopes will convert to a purchase or commitment. The reciprocity principle is so powerful that it's often used in negotiations and influence situations. A negotiator makes a concession. The other party feels obligated to make a concession in return. The reciprocity obligation can lead to agreements neither party would have made without the initial concession creating obligation. Your daily actions are controlled partly by the obligations you feel toward others. If you feel obligated to someone, you're more likely to comply with their requests. If you've received from someone, you're more likely to give to them. 11. The commitment consistency trick. How small commitments create larger ones. Once you've made a commitment, even a small one, your brain generates a powerful need to maintain consistency with that commitment. This is called commitment and consistency, and it controls much of your long-term behavior. If you commit to a small action, you're more likely to commit to larger actions that are consistent with the initial commitment. This is the foot in the door technique. You get someone to agree to something small, which creates commitment and consistency motivation, which makes them more likely to agree to something larger. A charity asks for a small donation. You give 5. Later, the charity asks for a larger donation. You're more likely to give it because you've committed to being a donor. Your commitment to the identity of donor motivates you to continue donating. A product company asks you to like their social media page. You do. Later, they ask you to share a post. You're more likely to do it because you've committed to supporting the company. Your commitment creates consistency motivation. A person asks you to agree with a statement. You agree. Later, they ask you to act in ways consistent with that statement. You're more likely to do it because you've committed to that position. Your commitment creates pressure to maintain consistency. What makes commitment consistency particularly controlling is that it operates across time. You made a commitment years ago, and the commitment and consistency motivation continues to influence your behavior. You're in a career because of a commitment you made years ago. You're in a relationship because of a commitment you made years ago. The original commitment continues to control your behavior through consistency motivation. Commitment consistency is exploited systematically through signed petitions, through public statements, through small initial commitments that are designed to lead to larger commitments. Your daily actions are controlled partly by past commitments. You continue behaviors because they're consistent with commitments you made in the past. 12. The availability. Bias trick. How recent information controls your beliefs. Your brain judges how frequently something occurs based on how easily you can recall examples. If you can easily think of examples, your brain assumes the thing occurs frequently. This is called availability bias, and it controls your beliefs about how common things are. A news story about a plane crash makes plane crashes seem more common than they are. You can easily recall. The plane crash. So your brain assumes plane crashes are frequent. Your actual risk of a plane crash hasn't changed, but your perception has changed. After hearing about a crime, you overestimate how common crime is in your area. After hearing about a disease, you overestimate how common the disease is in the population. The ease with which you can recall examples biases your assessment of how frequent the thing actually is. What makes availability bias particularly controlling is that it distorts your risk assessment. You make decisions about where to travel, what to do, what to be afraid of, based on availability bias rather than actual statistical risk. Your daily actions are controlled partly by what information is easily available to you. If you're frequently exposed to information about a particular risk, you believe that risk is more common than it actually is. If you're not exposed to information about a particular risk, you underestimate the risk. 13. The anchoring trick. How the first number controls subsequent judgments. When you're making a numerical judgment, the first number you encounter, even if arbitrary, becomes an anchor that influences your subsequent judgment. You adjust from the anchor, but you adjust insufficiently. The anchor exerts lasting influence. If a product is initially priced at 100 and then discounted to 50, the anchor price of 100 makes 50 seem like a bargain. If the product's actual value is 40, the anchor of 100 has influenced you to pay more than the product's actual value. In salary negotiations, the first number proposed becomes an anchor. If you propose $60,000 and the employer proposes $50,000, the negotiation likely concludes closer to $55,000. If you propose $80,000 and the employer proposes $70,000, the negotiation likely concludes closer to $75,000. The anchor shifts the entire negotiation. What makes anchoring particularly controlling is that it influences your judgments even when you know the anchor is arbitrary. Research shows that even if you know a random number was just pulled out of the air, that number will still influence your subsequent judgments about unrelated things. Your daily actions are controlled partly by anchors established earlier. The first salary offer you receive anchors subsequent salary negotiations. The first house price you learn anchors your perception of real estate values. The first price you see anchors your perception of product value. 14. The framing effect. Trick: how context changes your decisions. The same choice produces different decisions depending on how the choice is framed. If a choice is framed in terms of gains, you make different decisions than if the same choice is framed in terms of losses. A 90 success rate sounds appealing. A 10 failure rate sounds unappealing. They're the same statistic, but the framing changes your emotional response. A medical treatment that saves 200 lives out of 600 sounds good. The same treatment where 400 die out of 600 sounds bad. The outcome is identical, but the framing in terms of lives saved versus lives lost changes your preference. What makes framing particularly controlling is that you're often not aware the framing has influenced you. You think you're making independent judgments when you're actually responding to how the options are presented. Your daily actions are controlled partly by how choices are presented to you. If a choice is framed positively, you're more likely to choose it. If the same choice is framed negatively, you're less likely to choose it. 15. The confirmation bias trick: how your existing beliefs control your information. Processing: your brain seeks information that confirms your existing beliefs and dismisses information that contradicts your existing beliefs. This is called confirmation bias, and it controls what information you accept and what information you reject. If you believe something is true, you'll interpret ambiguous information as supporting that belief. You'll selectively remember information that supports the belief. You'll dismiss or reinterpret information that contradicts the belief. A person believes their partner is trustworthy. A partner's ambiguous behavior is interpreted as trustworthy. A person believes their partner is untrustworthy. The same ambiguous behavior is interpreted as untrustworthy. The belief controls the interpretation of the same evidence. A person believes a political position is correct. Evidence supporting the position is accepted. Evidence contradicting the position is dismissed as biased or unreliable. The belief controls which evidence is accepted as valid. What makes confirmation bias particularly controlling is that it creates a closed loop. Your existing beliefs control what information you process. The processed information confirms your existing beliefs. Your beliefs become more entrenched. Your daily actions are controlled partly by your existing beliefs. If you believe you're not good at something, you'll interpret ambiguous performance as evidence confirming that belief. If you believe you're good at something, you'll interpret ambiguous performance as evidence confirming that belief. 16. The mere exposure effect trick: how familiarity controls your preferences. The more you're exposed to something, the more you like it. This is called the mere exposure effect, and it controls much of your preferences and behaviors. You like a song more after hearing it repeatedly. You prefer faces you've seen frequently. You prefer products you've been exposed to repeatedly. The exposure itself, independent of any quality of the object, increases liking. A product advertised frequently becomes more likable, not necessarily because the advertisement is persuasive, but because the repeated exposure increases liking. A political candidate becomes more likable, partly because of repeated exposure, not just because of their policies. What makes the mere exposure effect particularly controlling is that it's largely unconscious. You're not consciously deciding to like something more because you've been exposed to it. The preference shifts automatically through exposure. Your daily actions are controlled partly by what you've been repeatedly exposed to. If you've been repeatedly exposed to a product, you're more likely to purchase it. If you've been repeatedly exposed to a message, you're more likely to believe it. 17. The sunk cost fallacy trick: how past investments control your future decisions. Your brain has a tendency to continue investing in something because of past investment, even when continued investment is not in your interest. This is called the sunk cost fallacy, and it controls many of your daily decisions. You continue watching a movie you're not enjoying because you've already invested an hour. You continue eating a meal you're not enjoying because you've already paid for it. You continue in a job you dislike because you've already invested years. You continue in a relationship that's not working because you've already invested so much time and emotional energy. What makes the sunk cost fallacy particularly controlling is that it overrides rational decision-making. Rationally, past investment shouldn't influence future decisions. Only future costs and benefits should matter. But your brain gives weight to past investment, causing you to continue inefficient investments. The fallacy is so powerful that it's exploited in marketing. Casinos exploit sunk cost fallacy by making it easy to continue gambling. You've already lost 100, so you might as well continue playing, hoping to recoup the loss. The sunk cost, the 100 already lost, drives further investment even though it's not rational. Your daily actions are controlled partly by how much you've already invested. The more you've invested in something, the more likely you'll continue investing even when it's not in your interest. 18. The peak end rule. Trick how memory distorts your experience. Your brain doesn't remember experiences accurately. Instead, your brain remembers experiences based on how intense the peak moment was and how the experience ended. This is called the peak end rule, and it controls how you evaluate your experiences. A terrible experience that ends well is remembered more positively than the actual experience would suggest. A colonoscopy that ends quickly is remembered as less painful than a colonoscopy that continues with mild discomfort, even though the second one was less painful overall. The ending of the experience shapes the memory more than the total duration or average intensity. A vacation that was mostly pleasant but ends with a terrible flight is remembered as a bad vacation. A vacation that was mostly mundane but ends with an amazing final day is remembered as a great vacation. The ending disproportionately influences the memory. A positive experience that ends badly is remembered more negatively than the actual experience would suggest. A concert that's great for 2 hours but ends with technical difficulties that ruin the finale is remembered as a mediocre concert. The ending overwrites the memory of the prior positive experience. What makes the peak end rule particularly controlling is that it means your actual quality of life and your memory of quality of life can diverge substantially. You might have had a pleasant day, but if it ended poorly, you'll remember it as an unpleasant day. Your daily actions are controlled partly by how you remember past experiences. If you remember an activity as pleasant, you're more likely to engage in it again. If you remember an activity as unpleasant, you're less likely to engage in it again. But the memory might not accurately reflect the experience. 19. The declinism. Bias trick, how your brain distorts historical perception. Your brain has a bias toward believing that the past was better than it actually was, and the future will be worse than it actually will be. This is called declinism bias, and it controls how you perceive historical trends and future prospects. People in every era believe things were better in the past and are getting worse in the future. People in 1950 believed the past was better and the future was worse. People in 1975 believed the same thing. People in 2000 believed the same thing. People today believe the same thing. But objective data shows that by most measures, life has improved substantially over time. What makes declinism bias particularly controlling is that it distorts your perception of trends and your motivation for action. If you believe things are getting worse, you're less motivated to invest in the future. If you believe things were better in the past, you're less likely to embrace new developments. Your daily actions are controlled partly by whether you believe things are improving or declining. If you believe your personal situation is declining, you act differently than if you believe it's improving. 20. The status quo bias trick. How change resistance controls your choices. Your brain has a powerful preference for the status quo. Given equivalent options, your brain prefers the option that maintains the current state. This is called status quo bias, and it controls many of your life decisions. You stay in a relationship because ending it would require change. You stay in a job because changing would require change. You stay in a location because moving would require change. The friction of change makes the status quo seem preferable, even when alternatives might be better. What makes status quo bias particularly controlling is that it creates path dependence. Your current choices constrain your future choices. The longer you maintain the status quo, the more costly change becomes, and the more entrenched the status quo becomes. People stay in unsatisfying careers partly because of status quo bias. Changing would require effort, risk, and adaptation. The status quo, even if unsatisfying, seems safer. Your daily actions are controlled partly by whether they maintain or challenge the status quo. Choices that maintain the status quo feel safer and more likely. Choices that challenge the status quo feel riskier and less likely. 21. The outgroup homogeneity bias trick. How your brain misperceives other groups. Your brain perceives people in your in-group as diverse individuals. Your brain perceives people in outgroups as more similar to each other and more defined by their group membership. This is called outgroup homogeneity bias, and it controls how you perceive and treat other groups. You see diversity within your own political affiliation, but see the opposing political group as more uniform. A national group sees diversity within their own nation, but sees other nationalities as more uniform. A professional group sees diversity within their profession, but sees other professions as more uniform. What makes outgroup homogeneity bias particularly controlling is that it makes stereotyping easier. If you perceive an outgroup as uniform, individual members of the outgroup are more likely to be stereotyped as embodying group characteristics. Your daily actions are controlled partly by how you perceive other groups. If you perceive an outgroup as threatening and uniform, you're more likely to avoid or treat members of the group differently than if you perceive the group as diverse. 22. The illusion of transparency. Trick how you overestimate how well others understand you. Your brain has a built-in bias toward assuming that others understand what you mean and understand your internal states more than they actually do. This is called the illusion of transparency, and it controls much of your communication. You believe your humor is obvious to others when it's often not. Your sarcasm is interpreted as seriousness. Your joke lands as offense. You believe your emotional state is visible to others when it's often not. Your anxiety appears as coldness. Your sadness appears as anger. You believe your intentions are clear to others when they're often ambiguous. What makes the illusion of transparency particularly controlling is that it creates failed communication and misunderstood interactions. You assume others understand you when they don't, so you don't explain clearly. You assume others know what you're thinking when they don't, so you don't communicate your needs. Your daily actions are controlled partly by how well you believe others understand you. If you believe they understand, you communicate less explicitly. If you believe they don't understand, you communicate more carefully. 23. The spotlight effect. Trick how you overestimate how much others notice you. Your brain has a bias toward believing that others are paying more attention to you than they actually are. This is called the spotlight effect, and it controls how self-conscious you are and how willing you are to take social risks. You feel like everyone noticed when you made a mistake. In reality, most people didn't notice. You feel like everyone is scrutinizing your appearance. In reality, most people are focused on their own appearance. A person is self-conscious about a blemish on their face. They believe others are staring at the blemish. In reality, most people don't notice the blemish. The spotlight effect causes unnecessary self-consciousness. What makes the spotlight effect particularly controlling is that it creates unnecessary social anxiety. You avoid social situations because you feel like you're being scrutinized more than you actually are. Your daily actions are controlled partly by how self-conscious you are. If you believe many people are watching you, you act differently than if you believe few people are paying attention. 24. The optimism bias trick, how your brain makes you underestimate risks. Your brain has a bias toward believing that bad things are less likely to happen to you than to others. This is called optimism bias, and it controls your risk assessment and your preparedness. You believe you're less likely to be in a car accident than average. You believe you're less likely to get sick than average. You believe you're less likely to face financial hardship than average. Yet logically, not everyone can be less likely than average. What makes optimism bias particularly controlling is that it causes you to underestimate risks and therefore be unprepared. You don't get insurance because you believe bad things are unlikely to happen to you. You don't save for emergencies because you believe you're less likely to face emergencies than average. You don't prepare for potential problems because you believe they're unlikely to occur. Your daily actions are controlled partly by your risk assessment. If you believe risks are unlikely, you act differently than if you believe risks are likely. 25. The self-serving bias trick, how your brain protects your self-image. Your brain attributes your successes to your own abilities and attributes your failures to external circumstances. This is called self-serving bias, and it protects your self-image. You succeed at something and attribute it to your skill. Someone else succeeds at something and you attribute it to luck or favorable circumstances. You fail at something and attribute it to circumstances. Someone else fails at something and you attribute it to their lack of ability. What makes self-serving bias particularly controlling is that it prevents accurate self-assessment and prevents learning from failure. You don't learn from failures because you attribute them to external circumstances rather than to your own actions. You don't recognize the role of luck in your successes because you attribute them to skill. Your daily actions are controlled partly by how you interpret your successes and failures. If you attribute failure to circumstance, you don't change your behavior. If you attribute success to skill, you become overconfident in that skill's reliability. The integration. How? These 25 tricks work together. The 25 psychological tricks detailed above don't operate in isolation. They work together, creating a comprehensive system of automatic behavior control that operates below conscious awareness. They interact, reinforce each other, and create self-perpetuating patterns. Your day begins with the habit loop trick executing your morning routine automatically. Momentum bias carries you forward through each task. Default bias keeps you on your typical path. Time perception distortion causes you to lose track of time and extend engagement with activities longer than intended. Decision fatigue accumulates as you make decisions throughout the day. Scarcity mindset becomes activated as time becomes scarce later in the day. Your attention allocation is captured by whatever is novel or emotionally significant. Reward prediction error drives you to check your phone repeatedly. Social proof influences what you believe and what you consume. Reciprocity creates obligations that influence your behavior. Commitment consistency keeps you engaged in activities and relationships you're already committed to. Availability bias distorts your perception of risks. Anchoring influences your numerical judgments. Framing effects influence your decisions. Confirmation bias filters your information processing. Mere exposure effect increases your liking for things you're repeatedly exposed to. Sunk cost fallacy keeps you invested in things you've already invested in. Peak end rule distorts your memory of your experiences. Declinism bias influences your perception of trends. Status quo bias keeps you doing what you're already doing. Outgroup homogeneity bias influences how you perceive other groups. Illusion of transparency affects your communication. Spotlight effect creates social anxiety. Optimism bias causes you to underestimate risks. Self-serving bias protects your self-image. These 25 tricks work together to create a system where most of your daily actions are executed automatically without requiring conscious deliberation. Your consciousness narrates the actions. I decided to do this. But the decision was made by non-conscious systems operating below awareness. What makes this integration particularly important to understand is that you cannot overcome this system through willpower. Willpower is a conscious phenomenon. You're trying to override automatic systems with conscious effort. The automatic systems are more powerful because they operate with minimal cognitive effort, while willpower requires depleting cognitive resources. The only way to change the system is to change the conditions that generate the automatic behavior. Change the cues that trigger habits. Change the structure that creates default bias. Change the information you're exposed to. Change the social environment. Change the incentive structure. In other words, you can't willpower your way to change. You can only environment your way to change. Practical application. How to work with these tricks. Understanding that these 25 tricks control 99 of your daily actions is one thing. Using this understanding to create meaningful change is another. Here's the practical insight. You're not trying to become conscious of every action. That's impossible and unnecessary. Instead, you're trying to understand which actions are being controlled by which tricks, and whether you want to continue being controlled by those tricks. If you want to change a behavior, identify which trick is controlling it. Is it the habit loop? Then change the cue or the reward. Is it momentum bias? Then change what gets started. Is it default bias? Then change the default. If you want to make better decisions, make them early in the day before decision fatigue depletes your cognitive resources. If you want to resist manipulation, understand which tricks are being applied to you so you can choose to resist. If you want to live more intentionally, understand that 99 of your daily actions are automatic. This means you have significant opportunity to design your environment and your systems to support the actions you want to take. The 25 tricks aren't your enemy. They're part of how your brain efficiently navigates a complex world. But understanding them gives you the possibility of working with them instead of being completely unconsciously controlled by them. For habit change, identify the cue, identify the routine, identify the reward. Then ask whether you want that cue routine reward loop to continue. If not, change one element, change the cue, different environment, change the routine, different action, or change the reward, different outcome you're seeking. For decision improvement, make important decisions early when cognitive resources are fresh. Reduce trivial decisions to preserve cognitive capacity for important decisions. Batch decisions rather than making them throughout the day. For resistance to manipulation, understand which tricks are being applied. Recognize when your attention is being captured by novelty. Recognize when social proof is influencing you. Recognize when anchoring has influenced your judgment. Once you recognize the trick, you can choose to resist it. For intentional living, design your environment to support the behaviors you want. Make the desired behavior the path of least resistance. Use default bias in your favor by setting defaults that support your goals. Use habit loops in your favor by creating cues that trigger desired behaviors. The deeper integration. How these tricks create your reality. The 25 tricks don't just control your daily actions. They create your entire experiential reality. What you perceive, what you believe, what you value, who you are, all of these are shaped by these tricks working together. Your perception of reality is controlled partly by attention allocation. What you attend to, you perceive as real and important. What you don't attend to, you perceive as unreal or unimportant. The media and information sources you're exposed to determine what gets your attention. This shapes your perception of reality. Your beliefs are controlled partly by confirmation bias and availability bias. You seek information that confirms your existing beliefs and dismiss information that contradicts them. The information you encounter frequently shapes your beliefs more than information you rarely encounter. Your beliefs are not independently arrived at. They're shaped by what information you encounter and how it's presented. Your values are shaped partly by social proof and mere exposure effect. You adopt values that many people around you hold. You come to value things you're frequently exposed to. Your values reflect your social environment more than independent reflection. Your identity is shaped partly by self-serving bias and commitment consistency. You interpret your successes and failures in ways that protect your self-image. You maintain consistency with past commitments, which locks you into identities you committed to in the past. Your identity is not a fixed thing you discover. It's constructed through these tricks. Your daily experience is shaped partly by peak-end rule and time perception. You remember experiences based on the peak moment and the ending, not the total experience. You perceive time as distorted by engagement and emotion. Your subjective experience of your life is not an objective record. It's distorted by these tricks. Understanding this reveals something profound. Your entire experiential reality is constructed by these automatic processes. You're not experiencing reality as it objectively is. You're experiencing a version of reality that your brain has filtered, distorted, and interpreted through these 25 tricks. This doesn't mean reality isn't real. It means your perception of reality is constructed. It means the world you experience is partly a creation of your own brain's machinery. This has profound implications. If your reality is constructed by these tricks, then changing the tricks changes your reality. If you change what you attend to, your reality changes. If you change what information you expose yourself to, your reality changes. If you change your environment, your reality changes. The paradox: 99 automatic, 1 intentional. Here's the fundamental paradox. Approximately 99 of your daily actions are controlled by automatic psychological mechanisms. Yet you experience yourself as in control, as making conscious decisions, as having free will. This paradox exists because consciousness creates narratives explaining automatic behavior. Your consciousness narrates what your automatic systems have already decided to do. You experience the narration as conscious decision-making. But here's what's important: that one that might be intentional, that's where real agency exists. That one is where you can make genuine choices about who you become and how you live. The practical question is, how do you maximize that one intentional agency? How do you make better use of the limited conscious capacity you have? First, recognize that you can't override your automatic systems through willpower. Willpower depletes cognitive resources. The automatic systems are more powerful because they require minimal cognitive resources to operate. You can't willpower your way past 99 of your behavior. Second, design your environment to support the behaviors and outcomes you want. Use the automatic systems in your favor. Set defaults that support your goals. Create environmental cues that trigger desired behaviors. Design reward structures that reinforce desired behaviors. Third, make your limited conscious capacity count. Use it for the decisions that matter most. Make those decisions early when cognitive resources are fresh. Don't waste conscious capacity on trivial decisions that could be automated or defaulted. Fourth, understand that you're working with your brain's machinery, not against it. These 25 tricks are features of how human brains work. They've kept humans alive and functioning for millions of years. They're not flaws to overcome, they're tools to work with. Fifth, recognize that change is slow. These are deeply embedded automatic systems. Changing them takes time. It requires consistent effort. It requires environmental design. It requires patience with yourself as your automatic systems gradually adjust to new patterns. Conclusion: the 99 problem and the one solution. You began this exploration believing you were largely in control of your actions. You're now aware that approximately 99 of your daily actions are controlled by automatic psychological mechanisms operating below conscious awareness. This is the 99 problem. It's the recognition that you're not as autonomous as you believe. Your actions are being controlled by mechanisms you didn't design, don't consciously access, and can barely recognize. But here's what's important. If 99 of your actions are automatic, that means one of your actions could potentially be conscious and intentional. One is not much, but it's not nothing. That one is where genuine agency exists. The practical implication is that you should focus on that one. You should make your most important decisions early in the day when cognitive resources are fresh. You should design your environment to support behaviors you want to engage in. You should build systems that work with the 25 tricks rather than against them. You cannot become fully conscious. You cannot escape the 25 tricks through willpower or determination. But you can become aware of them. And that awareness creates the possibility of intentional choice within the 99 that's automatic. The 25 psychological tricks that control 99 of your daily actions are now visible to you. Whether you use this visibility to change your daily actions is entirely up to you, or rather, up to the one of your actions that might be genuinely in your conscious control. The question is, what will you do with that one?